Now I want you to clap as if God is worthy. Would you do that? Let's give the Lord a hand. Well, I've told you this before. Thank you for coming. I've said this many times. I got up this morning and I said, Lord, for every drop of rain that falls, a Baptist stalls. And so I knew we'd be a little bit down today, and there's a reason for that, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But I just want to tell you how glad it is. I did something last week I never thought I would do. I joined the COVID club. How many of you been in the COVID club? Okay. It's the most frustrating thing. I went to bed Friday night, didn't feel real well, just congested. I woke up the next morning. My doctor's a strong believer, loves the Lord, and so I texted him. I said, "Hey, David, I need a Z-Pack." I told him, I don't feel good. I'm coughing up phlegm, and I'm just stopped up, and just don't feel good. And so normally he'll just say, "I'll call you in." Well, he calls me, and he said, "Tell me your symptoms again, Pastor." And I told him, and he said, "You need to take a COVID test." I said, "Man, I ain't got COVID." "Yeah, you need to take a COVID." I said, "I don't." He said, "I'm telling you, I'm seeing it everywhere." So went into the bedroom. Teresa gave me the COVID test. I walked out. She said, "I'll call you in 15 minutes. She said, "Hey, come here." And when I walked in, I just looked at her face, and I knew it was not good news. And I said, "Don't tell me. I don't even want to know." He says, "Nope, you've got COVID." I said, "I'm telling you, that's wrong." She said, "Well, I have a different kind of COVID test." I took a second one. I was positive. So I called my doctor back. He said, "I'm telling you," I said all the time. I said, "Doc, I don't feel bad. I'm just a little bit congested." And he said, "Well," he said, "I understand." He said, "But I'm going to call you." And he called the Paxlovid, I think it's called. And then before I could say anything, he said, "You know what this means?" I said, "No, I don't know what it means." He said, "Well, you can't preach tomorrow." I said, "Sure I can." He said, "No, you can't." I said, "Yes, I can." He said, "No, you can't." And so I said, "You got to be." So I called Mike Daniels, and Mike's not here. Mike's on a little time away. But Mike did a great job last week with 24 hours notice. And so I want to tell Mike how much I appreciate him. Well, let me begin. Good morning to those of you who are watching online. I feel great, doing great. There are very, very few people. I've met a few, but there are very, very few people who never get angry about anything. And you may one of those be, but one of those kind of people. You're just real mild-mannered. And what I have found is you may be the most mild-mannered of mild-mannered people. But I've learned that if you dig deep enough, everybody has a nerve you can strike the wrong way. Everybody's got, I'll call it, the hot button. Now, I promise you there's someone in your life that knows how to hit your hot button. If you're a parent, it's one of your kids, okay? If you're married, it's one of your in-laws. But I'm telling you, you've got somebody in your life, and sometimes they don't even have to try. And they just absolutely know where that hot button is. They know how to push it. They can get your blood from 0 to 212 degrees in no time. Well, don't get discouraged, because even Jesus had a hot button, because he was human, just like us. And there was one thing that, I mean, you literally could push it on cue, and it made his blood boil. It set him on fire. It made the veins pop out on his neck. It dilated his pupils. And it's found in one word that's only used by him in all of the New Testament. And this thought, this word, this person just set him on fire. And the word is hypocrite. Nothing ticked him off like a hypocrite. Nothing angered him and made him so mad like a hypocrite. As a matter of fact, that word's only used 17 times in the New Testament. He's the only one that uses it every single time. But here's the amazing thing. He never used the word to describe unchurched people. He never used the word to describe pimps or prostitutes or drug addicts or alcoholics or murderers or rapists. He saved that word for religious people. He saved that word for people who always went to church. And the ones that really got him moving, I mean in the wrong direction, was a group of people called Pharisees. They were the cross every T, dot every I crowd. They came to church if it was raining, snowing, it didn't matter. They gave a tithe of every dollar they ever made. They read their Bible every day. They were the model of morality. They were a picture of piety. And yet, no fewer than 7 times in just one message, Jesus denounced these Pharisees. I'm talking about words, you can feel the heat coming out of what he said. He said this 7 times. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He said that 7 different times. Now the question is, what is it about hypocrisy? What is it about hypocritical people that just got Jesus off? I mean, that just literally set him on fire. What made him so angry about these people? Well, there were 2 particular things these hypocrites did that just lit his fire. First of all, he points this out. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do. This is what set him off, for they do not practice what they preach. Jesus said, I can't stand somebody that tells you how to live, but they don't live the way they're telling you to live. They tell you what to do, but they don't even do what they tell you to do. But then there was a second thing about these guys that just set him off. He said this, everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. He said, I can't stand it when people put on a show, when people pretend there's something that they're not. People who talk the talk in public, but they don't walk the walk in private. So we're coming today to the 6th chapter of the book of Matthew. And by the way, we've got brand new notebooks for you. You should have gotten one when you come in. We're on page 4, if you'd like to turn there. We're in a series that we've been calling Get Used to Different through the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is going to call attention now to some of the ways that hypocrisy is displayed. And here's what amazes me. Jesus is talking about hypocrisy. He's going to talk about it several times. And the first area he chooses to deal with is giving. We're in a capital campaign. We're calling Preparing the Way. Just like John the Baptist prepared the way, we want to prepare the way, those of us who are here and now, I want us to prepare the way for the next generation, for people who will be here long after we're gone. So I want you to keep something in mind as we go through this little message today. I want you to keep in mind the major point that Jesus is about to make, okay? So this is what I want you to hear. Why you give is more important to God than what you give. Why you give is more important to God than what you give. So while you pray about and you think about what you're going to give and the commitment you're going to make to our giving campaign, I just want you to think about 3 things we learned from Jesus today about giving. One may kind of shock you. Here's the first one. First thing we learn is Jesus assumes we will give. It's just an assumption. He begs the question. Now, the first step to doing the right thing the right way, guess what that is? The first step is you got to do the right thing. You can't do the right thing the right way if you don't do the right thing first. So when it comes to Jesus giving, Jesus assumes that's exactly what we'll do. So listen to what he said. He said, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have your reward from your Father in heaven. Now listen to these next 4 words. So everybody, what's that word? Say it out loud. When. He says, so when you give. Now keep something in mind. He's right there looking at the Sea of Galilee up on the Mount of Beatitudes. He's preaching to thousands and thousands of people. These are not your elite. These are not your Lamborghini driving, palace living rich people. He's talking to just run of the mill. In fact, some of them were very poor. Some of them were very needy. 99% of that crowd, they were just common laborers. They were just minimum wage workers. Who was he talking to when he said, when you give? He was talking to fishermen. He was talking to farmers. He was talking to shepherds. And yet Jesus expected everybody to give. He didn't say if you give. He didn't say if you can afford to give. He didn't say if you've got something to give. He said when you give. Now, admittedly, he was talking specifically about giving to poor people, but what he's about to tell us applies to all kinds of giving. So let me give you an example. When you give to our church, you're giving to a ministry called CarePoint. Let me just show you a picture of what we do. We do this a couple of times a week. We feed hungry people. We clothe poor people. Now, there's a reason why you see these police officers here. Because one of the ministries you allow us to do and help us do because of what you give to our church, we actually minister to a precinct here in our county. Mike Daniels and Bruce Hardy are chaplains for the police department. They couldn't do that. We couldn't do that if you did not give to our church and help us support ministries like this. Now, I want to stop right here. I'm going to get very honest for just a moment. When I talk about the fact that Jesus just assumes you will give, I understand that a lot of you can't even relate to what I just said. I understand a lot of you really can't even grasp what I just said. You say, well, why did you say that? Because 35% of people who attend church never give a dime to the church. So that means almost 4 out of 10 of you that come here every week, you don't give one dime to this church, 35%. 37% only give sporadically. That is, they give every now and then, and maybe it's $1 here or $5 there. So in other words, here's what I know. 62% of people who come to church either don't give anything to the church or they only give something here and there. So I'm just going to say something that Jesus was saying, so don't take my word for it. This is what Jesus said. Jesus said very plainly, hey, everybody give something. You say, you don't know my financial position. I don't have to know your financial position. Everybody gives something. There's not a person here, and I'm going to be as low as I can get. Everybody in this church can give a penny a day. How can you not give anything? How about a penny a day? Can you start there? Because I'm just telling you, Jesus said, when you give. And in this campaign, we're not looking for equal gifts. Not everybody can give the same thing. We're just looking for equal sacrifice. Everybody can give something. And by the way, when you give, it's not the size of the gift that matters. It is the sacrifice of the gift that's important. By the way, you know what's interesting? Did you know that Jesus only singled out one person one time in the entire 4 Gospels? He only singled out one person for their giving. And it wasn't a rich person. It was a poor person. It was a widow. You know how much she gave to the church that day? Less than 1/2 of a penny. And yet Jesus pointed out that woman and said, did you see that? Did you see what that woman gave? Now that's the spirit Jesus said, I wish that you had. Now remember, Jesus is talking about hypocrisy. So when it comes to giving, if you think about it, I want you to think about this. You can be a hypocrite in one of 2 ways in your giving. You ready? On the one hand, you can let people know what you give, just like the Pharisees did. Hey, I gave $1,000. How much did you give? I gave $500. How much did you give? Jesus said you can be a hypocrite by letting people know what you give. But there's another way you can be a hypocrite. You can let people think that you give when you don't. See, the person that you're sitting next to, he's one of those 62%. He doesn't give anything to our church or gives very little or gives sporadically, but you don't know that. And he knows you don't know that. So he can look and smile as if he's not one of those people because you don't know. You're a hypocrite. You're letting that guy next to you think, oh, I'm not one of those people. Yes, you are. He just doesn't know it. So you can be a hypocrite in showing what you give, letting people know what you give. You can also be a hypocrite by being one of those people that don't give a dime, but you let everybody think you do because you walk in here the same way, you sit in the same seat, you smile the same smile, you sing the same song, you hear the same message, you see the same ministry, and you keep your wallet in your pocket and never give a dime to the church. Now, if that makes you mad, you apologize, I'll forgive you. It's just true. He says so. He said it's a shame. You know what really, I have young pastors ask me now, hey, Doc, what are the hard things in your ministry? And ministry's hard. If you think my job is easy, come do it for a week. Glad to have you. It's not easy. Can I tell you one of the hardest things that I've had to face in my ministry? Every church I pastored, even my little old country church, first little country church, every church I pastored, the person that handled the money has said this to me. Don't ever ask and don't ever try to find out what people give to the church. You will be greatly disappointed. So let me give you the good news. The good news is I don't check giving records. I don't do that. I have the right, and I can exercise the right. I choose not to because I don't want to be disappointed. But what breaks my heart is I just want to remind you, I don't know whether you give or not, but he does. And one of these days, you're not going to stand before me about what he gave you. You're going to stand before him. So I want you to understand that, it's just, I don't choose to do it because I don't want to do it. So I just want to get very pointed and personal just for a moment. Whether it's coming here and hearing the Word of God, or enjoying great worship, or providing opportunities for kids and teenagers and college kids and singles to get spiritual truth that they need that they don't get at school. Some of them don't even get it at home. Whether it's feeding and clothing hundreds of needy families every single month, whether it's supporting church plants and missionaries here and around the world, whether it's ministering to police officers that desperately need it, when you give, you're keeping the lights on, you're keeping the doors open, you're keeping ministry going out of this church 7 days a week. So here's my point. If Jesus were the guest preacher today and he got up to preach on giving, here's what he would say to every one of you. When you give, I'm assuming you'll give. First thing we learn. Second thing we learn is this. Jesus advises us on how to give. He assumes we will give. Now he advises us on how we give. Now I want to go back because we're going to get ready to do this over the next several weeks about what he's doing, what he's talking about. There were basically 3 ways that Jewish people practiced their religion back in that day. They did it by giving, they did it by praying, and they did it by fasting. And Jesus talks about all of those 3 in this chapter. And Jesus says, look, I expect everybody to give. I expect everybody to fast. I expect everybody to pray. But before he tells them and us how to do it, he said, let me tell you how not to do it. Here's how you don't do it. Here's what he said. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. They're receiving their reward in full. So if Jesus were preaching this sermon today, here's what he would say. Let's say you're wealthy. He'd say, look, don't expect a building to be named after you just because you give a lot of money. Or let's say you're not really wealthy. He'd say to you, well, don't even accidentally let it slip that you've given anything. Don't even make a show of it to yourself. But then he adds this. He said, but when you give to the needy, don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Now here's the point. We ought to give generously. We ought to give gladly. We ought to give graciously. We ought to give sacrificially. But Jesus said we ought to give secretly. He said, don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What did he mean by that? Well, the right hand's the dominant hand. And that's usually the hand we use to pat ourselves on the back. And so what Jesus is saying is, I want your giving to be out of such a pure motive, you don't even brag to yourself. You don't even pat yourself on the back. You don't even say to yourself, well, at least I gave something, and look what I gave. As a matter of fact, when it came to giving and fasting and praying, Jesus said, let me tell you the best place to give. Let me tell you the best place to pray. Let me tell you the best place to fast. He said the best place is the secret place. When nobody's looking, nobody's watching. 3 times in this passage, I want you to listen carefully 3 times. Listen to every time Jesus uses the word secret. Just listen to it. When you give to the needy, or when you give, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is in secret will reward you openly. What's this? When you pray, go into your room, close the door, pray to your Father who's unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. When you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face. It will not be obvious to others that you're fasting, but only to your Father who's unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now let me ask you a question. Why is the secret place so important to God? Why is it so important that you do these things where nobody is watching. I'll tell you why. Because when you give secretly and you pray secretly and you fast secretly, the only being in the universe that you can be doing it to, that you can be doing it with, that you can be doing it for is God. Because when you're in that secret place, guess what? There's no applause. There's no acclaim. There are no awards. There's no trophy. There's no publicity. It is for God's eyes only. So Jesus, number one, assumes we will give. And Jesus advises us on how to give. Do it secretly. Do it humbly. Do it joyfully, expecting nothing in return except two things. I want other people to be blessed, and I want God to be glorified. So let me get a little more practical. I don't know about you, but I thank God that I get to itemize my tax return, and I thank God I get to take charitable deductions off my taxes. I love my country, but I'm not Santa Claus. And I'd rather somebody else get it than the government. I'm going to be honest. I want the government to get, what they ought to have, but no more. But if you give to get the tax deduction, God writes zero. I'm not trying to brag. If Congress outlawed all charitable giving to be deducted from taxes today, wouldn't affect my giving a dime. I don't do it for that reason. So Jesus said, first of all, he assumes that we will give. Then he advises us on how to give. But now watch what he does. He knows what he does. He's a great psychologist. Jesus assures us when we give. Now let me tell you what I mean by that. This is something that's just natural. We're all born with this. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just being human. All of us like to be recognized when we do something good. All of us do. We want somebody, somewhere, at some time to notice the good that we do, to appreciate the good that we do. And let me tell you some good news. Here's what I've learned in my life. Don't worry. If you do enough good in enough places, trust me on this, eventually somebody's going to see it. Eventually somebody's going to know it. Eventually, somebody's going to applaud you. Eventually, somebody's going to praise you. But what Jesus is saying is, don't ever do it for that reason. So go back to what Jesus' first words were and remember what he said. He said, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them, because if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Now, by the way, that Greek word for the word seen, be careful not to practice in front of others, to be seen, that Greek word is the word that gives us the word theater. And it means something to be stared at. In other words, what Jesus said, when you give or when you pray or when you fast, don't put on a Broadway performance. Don't put on a show. Don't do it in such a way that you're trying to impress somebody else. And I don't mean to be unkind or be ugly, but I'm just going to be very honest. I really do. And I've been in these kind of meetings when people get up to pray, and they 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 pray. It gets on my last nerve. The second thing is, not only do they pray forever, but they revert back 600 years to the King James Version. Oh, thou holy potentate. And I'm thinking, where did that guy go that was just sitting down here? So one thing I've never ever done in my life, I don't catch up on my praying in public. I don't pray long in public. I do my praying in private. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just simply saying, Jesus said, look, if you give for a show, fast for a show, pray for a show, don't be like Deion Sanders. It ain't prime time. Don't strut your stuff. In fact, that's Jesus went on to say about these Pharisees. Here was their problem. Listen to this. He said, they loved human praise more than praise from God. Now, understand, this is so important. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. There is nothing wrong. There are times you ought to do things for Jesus publicly and openly. Don't worry about whether the people are watching or not. I may have told you, but there's a little cart girl. I'm a member at the Georgia Club. I was playing golf on Friday. There's a cart girl. I want you to pray for her. Her name is Stephanie. Stephanie's not a believer. Sweet girl, maybe she's smiling. In fact, she really fooled me. She's been out there for a year. And I just assume she's a believer. She's always smiling. She's always happy, always nice, always sweet. She is has no spiritual clue at all, lost. I've been working on her. I had two guys who have not played golf with me. So when Stephanie came around, I said, hey guys, excuse me, I got to talk to Stephanie. She came up because I've been trying to get her to read the Gospel of John. And so she came up, I could tell by the look, she had the sheepish look. I knew what she was going to say. And I appreciate it. She said, Pastor, I've not been reading the Gospel of John. I said, that's okay. I said, look, Stephanie, I'm not trying to bug you. She said, you're not bugging me. I know you care about me. You remember what you told me last Friday? I said, yep, you told me you're going to heaven, you want me to go with you. I said, that's exactly right. She says, I promise you that I am going to start reading John tomorrow. Now, hear me carefully. I didn't do that for the benefit of those guys. They just happened to be there. But I took the chance to say, there's nothing wrong with saying a prayer and saying a blessing in public. You're not showing off. In fact, I think you ought to do. You ought to let people know that you know where your food came from. That is not what Jesus is saying. The point is this. If the result of what you do is that people see it's good, that's all right, no problem. But if that's the reason that you do it, Jesus says, okay, if you're doing it for the applause, if you're doing it for the awards, if you're doing it for the acclaim, that's the only reward you're going to get right there. But Jesus goes on to say this in verse 2. Now watch this. He said, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with the trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. That word reward is a technical expression. It's a financial term, and it refers to a commercial transaction where a receipt would be given, and it would say paid in full. And what Jesus is saying is, if you do what you do so other people will see it, other people will know it, other people will applaud it, other people will pat you on the back, other people will brag on you, Jesus said, you better enjoy that moment because that is all the reward you're going to get. It will all be forgotten. But the thing that I want all of us to hold on to is this. Make sure, Jesus said, that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And oh, by the way, yes, some people don't like this idea. There is such a thing as heavenly rewards. And nobody else may know the money that you give to God's work. Nobody else may know the service you give to God's people. Nobody else may know the comfort you give to those who hurt. Nobody else may ever know the encouragement you give to those who are discouraged. But let me tell you this. If you just give a cup of cold water in His name, God knows it. God sees it. God writes it down. God says there's going to come a day. You know what's going to happen with a lot of us in heaven? God's going to bring a lot of things to our mind we did and totally forgot about, but He didn't. Do you remember when, no, Lord, I forgot that. Well, I saw it. I remembered it. I've got a reward for you. I've got something for you because of what you have done. And what Jesus is saying is, if you give for the right reason, at the right time, to the right cause, you will be rewarded in heaven. That's true whether you're rich or poor. That's true whether you give a little or you give a lot. So, this is how I want you to view this capital campaign. We're giving you an opportunity to give for the right reason, at the right time, to the right cause. Now, many of you know we're asking for you today to commit to 12 months. We're calling it Preparing the Way. I'm asking you to make a 12-month commitment. Now, I want to give you some unbelievable news. The goal of our campaign is $1 million that we want our church to give over and above your tithe, over and above what you give to the budget, to give $1 million to our church. We've asked certain people, would you help us get this goal started? I just found out this morning that we've already had people, just a few people, commit $735,000 to this campaign. That's an applause line right there. But here's what's more important than that. So I'm going to take some of you off a hook. If you even have an inkling, if you even have a thought, if it even just flashes across your mind that this is about money, keep it. God doesn't need your money. Matter of fact, it's not your money. He already has it. me tell you why I want you to give. You know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Can I just show you two real quick? This is a picture of Israel and his sweet wife. They've been in our church about 9 or 10 years. But they came here and came to our church to be trained for ministry. We helped him go through seminary. They're going back to Ethiopia, to a very difficult part of that country, to minister to the gospel, to make disciples of other people. They are going as our representatives. They're going for our church. Because of your gifts, we're able to do that. But before I show the next picture, now this guy doesn't know I'm going to do it, and he won't mind it. And he never dreamed that he would be used the way he's about to be used. This is Perry Alcott. Perry had no clue I was going to do this. He's sitting right there. Let me tell you about Perry Alcott. So Perry, they came about a couple of years ago. They actually started with their daughter and son, or son and daughter-in-law. And they've been going to another church, wasn't getting fed, came over here and said, this is what we've been missing. They came, and so they started coming. First Sunday, Perry walks in, wife brought him. They're walking out. Perry hadn't been in church in half a century. So she walks up to my table. Now, Perry didn't walk up to the table. He's back behind her. And he's not looking real thrilled to begin with. So she comes up to me and she says, hey, Pastor, said Perry's here. And said, you know, first time he's been in church in decades. And I just want to tell you, just, pray for him. I said, hey, Perry, how you doing? He didn't hardly say anything. I thought, well, he won't be back. But the next Sunday, Perry came back. And the next Sunday, Perry came back. And the next Sunday, Perry came back, sat right there. Never would go out the door. Hey, Perry, hardly speak, wouldn't say a word. I bird dogged that guy for a year. Bird dogged him for a year. Hey, could I just come out and visit in Perry's home? Nope. I wait about 3 months. Am I right or wrong? Tell him the truth. Could I just come out? Nope. Went on for a year. One Sunday, I'm at my table. And Perry's walking up to me, not her, Perry. And he's smiling. I didn't know he knew how to do it. He walks up to me and he's smiling. And he looks me right in the eye and he says, Pastor, I just want you to know, I've given my heart to Jesus. When did you do that? Last Sunday. You pray this prayer. I gave my heart to Jesus. Now, if that wasn't enough to cause me to have a heart attack, then I said, well, could I come out and visit with you in your home? Would love to have you. Really? I want to come talk to you about baptism. Teresa and I went out there that week, went out there that night. Didn't have to talk to you about baptism. I want to get baptized. So, this is a picture of right after my brother, my friend, Perry Alcott, got baptized. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what you're giving to. That's what I'm asking you to invest in. That's where I'm asking you to take some of this money to buy stuff we don't need, that we can't afford, to impress people we don't even like. Invest it in something like this. So I want to close with this story. I've waited all week to tell this story. I couldn't even tell it. I couldn't even dictate it without laughing, so I'll just warn you. There was a man who was extremely rich. Matter of fact, he was known as the richest man in town. He lived in a palatial mansion. He drove several vintage automobiles. He owned every bank in the county. Well, one day there was a knock on the door, and it was somebody raising money from a charitable organization that built fresh water wells in poor countries that didn't have clean water. So when the man came to the door, this young guy's real enthusiastic, and he's got his spiel, and he lays out his case as to why this man ought to make a very generous donation. He said, sir, when you give to this cause, you're going to help children drink clean water. You're going to save so many people from disease and sickness and illness. He said, sir, it's obvious you're a man of means. People know you're the wealthiest man in the whole town. And I'm asking, would you consider being one of our anchor givers And would you give $10,000 to this campaign? Boy, he thought, man, I've nailed it. The guy looked at him and he said, well, you know, he said, I understand why you think I could give $10,000. And he said, look, I do own every bank in the town. And it does appear that I have great wealth. And by the way, that's not even all the investments. I've got a lot of other lucrative investments. He said, but you know, there's some things about me you don't know, boy. He said, sir? He said, yeah. He said, do you know that I have a mom who was left without any money when my dad died? Lives in a very expensive assisted living complex? He said, no, sir, I didn't know that. And the man said, yeah, and did you know I have a brother who's disabled? He can't work, can't even afford to rent an apartment to live in? Boy, this guy's feeling bad, and I says, no, sir, I didn't know that. He said, and you didn't know, I don't guess, that I have a son who's a missionary overseas, and he's got a wife and 5 kids, and he's got to raise his own support, and he can barely feed them. In fact, they live in a tent. He can't even afford the house. But you didn't know that, did you? And now the guy's just embarrassed. He feels so bad, and he said, sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea to learn all of that. And then the man said, just before he shut the door, well, if I don't give a dime to them, what makes you think I'd give anything to you? So I'm not asking you today, if you give, that's an insult. It's an insult to you. It's an insult to Jesus. I'm saying, hey, when you give, will you give out of gratitude for what God has given to you? Would you give it for the glory to not only the one who gave it to you, but by the way, the one who gave his son for us so that we might have a heaven to go to, a heaven to be rewarded in, knowing that there will be reward waiting for you in heaven? Would you give to the God who loved you so much, he gave his only son, that because we and people like Perry Alcott believe in him will have eternal life? Would you pray with me? With heads bowed, with eyes closed, I have a question I want to ask. And it's the most important question I'm going to ask you today. And it's not about money, not about giving. Here's my question. Is there anyone here today, you've never given your heart to Christ? You've never given your heart to Jesus? I'm not saying this is true about everybody that doesn't give. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying you have to give to be a Christian. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you got to give to go to heaven. I am saying this. I do believe that there are a lot of people, and the reason why they don't give any of their treasure to the church is because they've never given their heart to Jesus. So I just wonder, is there anyone here today, and you know that's your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is not you're selfish. It's not that you're greedy. It's not that you're stingy. Your greatest problem is you're just a sinner, and you need Jesus. You need a Savior. I'd like for you to start there. I'd like for you to start giving Jesus your heart. Everything else falls into, it's like the first domino. When you give Jesus your heart, everything else falls into place. So if you've never done that, would you like to do it right now? Would you like to do what my buddy, my brother, Perry did? Would you like to right now just say, Lord Jesus, today I'm giving you all of my heart. Today I'm giving you all of my life. I believe you died for my sins. I believe God raised you from the dead. I believe you're alive right now. Would you come into my heart? Would you save me? Would you forgive me? I repent of my sin and turn away from my old way of life. And I receive your free gift of eternal life. Thank you for forgiving me of my sins. Now, if you prayed that prayer and you're watching online right now, would you just let us hear from you? If you just go to crosspointchurch.com/next, we'd love to hear from you and help you get started in your walk with God. But if you're in the room today and you gave your life to Jesus, just then you gave your heart to him, and you're not ashamed that you did it, when this service is over, I want to invite you to go out to the lobby. There's a table right in the middle of it. It's called Connection Point. Next step, you can't miss it. Go out to that table and just simply say to somebody out there, hey, I gave my life to Jesus today. I trusted Jesus Christ with my heart today. Maybe your next step is to be baptized. Some of you have never been biblically baptized. Maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe your next step is to join this church. We've got a class right now called Starting Point going on right now for people who want to join this church. You can get in on that even next week. Whatever that decision is, you take that next step. Now, before we close, I want you to take a moment and I want you to pray this prayer. If you're a believer, by the way, if you're not a follower of Jesus, we don't expect you to give or want you to give. Don't ask you to give. But you're a follower of Jesus. You attend our church. This church is a blessing to you and your family. I want you to pray this prayer right now. Lord, what would you have me to give? Lord, what would you have my family to give? Lord, what would you want my wife and I to give? I know you assume that we will, and you have every right to do that. We will give what you ask us to give. And the reason I want you to pray that prayer is this. When you give what God tells you to give, then he has to come up with it. You don't. So, Father, thank you for the people who've already been so unbelievably generous in their giving. Bless them. But Lord, I want to pray today for the widows who can give a mite. I want to pray today for the truck drivers who can give whatever it may be a week. I just want to pray, Lord, that everybody, maybe somebody for the first time, maybe many for the first time, would just understand the joy of giving, of knowing you're investing treasure in heaven. But Lord, what's most important to me, I pray that nobody will leave this church, will leave this building, will turn us off of the television or the computer without having Jesus in their heart. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let's stand to our feet. We've got one more song we're going to sing. We're going to bless the Lord. And I want to bless you. By the way, let me just say this. I want to make sure I've got it in. You all have this card, okay? You all have this card. We don't want to miss it. We'd ask you to fill that out. You can drop it into the Giving Center today. I think we had a QR code. If I missed it, I'm sorry. We got a QR code that you can get on. There it is right there. You can just use that QR code and you can make your gift and make your pledge today. So I ask you to do that and do it for the glory of God. Do it for the blessing of others. Let's sing together.